Here's the truth. Most grant reviewers probably wouldn't admit this out loud, but as a former grant reviewer, and I jump on the grant review committee every now and then, we usually decide within the first 10 to 15 seconds of reading grant proposals whether we're going to read the whole thing and potentially award that organization. So 10 to 15 seconds, that's all you get. Hi, I'm Ashley Adams with Lotus 9, where we help new and grassroots nonprofit founders such as yourself better position yourself and your organization to receive foundation grant funding. And in today's video, we're going to talk about the top 3 reasons grant reviewers stop reading your grant applications so fast. And most importantly, what you can do instead to make sure your application gets read from front to back. So I know what it's like to spend hours on a grant application. You really need this money to move your nonprofit further, and you feel as though you need to put everything about your nonprofit into that grant application just to be sure that you get that funding. But to be honest, more than likely the whole thing will not get read past maybe the first 1 or 2 pages. As a grant reviewer, when I look at grant applications, we usually have definitely more than one to look at. I've sat on some committees where we had about 10 to 15 to read in a couple of hours time span. So as a grant reviewer, what we're looking for is, are you hitting the major points? First thing, does your mission align? Secondly, is your project innovative if it's something different? The third thing I would say is your application or submission clear? Can I find the information that I'm looking for, or is it buried behind a bunch of stuff that doesn't even apply to the grant application? So what I've discovered about myself as a grant reviewer, I'm looking for those certain things that's going to tell me whether or not you are a good candidate to receive this funding. So part of your application being easy to read is actually the mechanics of basic writing. Like I mentioned before, can I find the information I'm looking for? So are you using bold font? Are you underlining things? Are you using italics? Depending on how you're applying, if you're submitting a Word document narrative, or if you're using a grant application portal so you can submit it electronically, you may or may not be able to do some of those things. But if you're submitting a document, definitely utilize bold font, underlining, and using italics, because it makes the information stand out. Another thing that you can also use is how you're spacing things. Are you giving things titles? Are you labeling things? There's a lot of different writing techniques you can use to make the information in your grant application more findable for the grant reviewer. So the first point we're going to discuss today is that whether or not what you're proposing is in alignment with the funding priorities of the foundation you've submitted to. The probably top reason why applications stop getting read past the first maybe paragraph or 2 is if what you're proposing is not in alignment with what the funding priorities are of that foundation. Plain and simple. If you find yourself when you're submitting applications or preparing applications, you feel like you're pulling teeth to make your program align with what the funder is looking for, then you're not a fit. You can't put a square peg into a round hole, and the funder is not going to allow you to do that anyway. So if they fund educational programs and your program is an after-school program, that's not really in alignment, and it doesn't speak to the quality of your program. It just means your program is not what the funder is looking for. So here's my advice. Before you hit submit on the application, or even before you start working on a grant application, be 110% sure that what you're potentially proposing is in line with what the funder is looking for. So you can do that a couple of different ways. You can see if you can figure it out on your own by going on their website, or you can reach out and give them a call. This is why it's so important to start the grant writing process early as possible before a deadline. Because when you're running up on a deadline of maybe within a couple of days, if you can find someone to reach out to at the foundation, they're probably busy with processing applications that as they're coming in. So you may or may not have an opportunity to speak to someone. So that's why I always say start early. Okay, our next point for today is that the opening line of your application may be weak. Now, once again, depending on how you're submitting this, if it's an online portal, you probably have a character limit and, the little text box that you have to put your information in. So you may not have the opportunity or the space to have this awesome introduction, but try to make sure that your opening paragraph is attention-getting. You could always say something like, well, instead of saying something like this, we're a 501c3 founded in 2020 to help the underserved, blah, blah, blah. You probably already lost them. If you haven't lost who's ever reading your application, you sound like every other application. Try to stand out. Instead, you can use something like, every year, 300 women in our city return home from incarceration without safe housing. We want to make sure they're not doing it alone. When you attach that 300, that gives the person reading your application perspective. And then from there, you can start getting their buy-in, and they're probably curious, oh, how can we help address this problem through our funds? So see, that's powerful when you attach a number, maybe a story if you have the opportunity. It makes what you're saying more clear and funders more interested, and they want to help who you're serving. That's powerful. That's powerful, clear, and funders immediately know who you serve, what the problem is, and why it matters. Starting out with a hook or something along those lines will always make you stand out from the rest of the applications. Our third point for today is that your solution isn't backed with evidence. And that's the third reason why most applications don't get read past 10 to 15 seconds. If you can't describe what your problem is and have supporting evidence that is actually a problem, then it's just the idea that you came up with in your head. That's how funders are going to look at it. They want to see, if we give this money to your nonprofit, can you deliver the results that you're promising? This doesn't mean that you have to have, years-long record of providing service. It just means that you have to have some kind of evidence. That's why it's so important that you track everything where you're starting out. And I know everything is kind of a general term, but track what you can. Eventually, as you move on and progress in your nonprofit, you'll start to see what actually you should be tracking, what's moving your nonprofit forward, and what funders in general are requesting from you as far as data. So you're not going to have to track everything forever, but it's good to start out tracking what you can so you have the option of what to continue to track in the future. So at the very least, you can have some small statistics. What happened when you first rolled your program out? Even if you only serve 20 clients, what were the outcomes of serving those 20 clients with your intervention? As someone who used to work in a research department, you can always extrapolate the results. And basically by that, I mean, take the results from serving 20 clients, multiply it by, let's say, 5 to make the numbers easy. If you got this result with 20 clients, if we multiply that times 5, you'll end up with 100 clients. So if we do this for 20 clients, we get this result. If we do it for 100 clients, we'll get a bigger impact, and so on and so forth. Okay, so if you're not good at collecting data, numerical data, try collecting stories. That's an easy way to make yourself stand out amongst the crowd. People can hear numbers all day long, but if you attach a story to that, that'll make you stick out in their minds. Or even research. If you're providing a solution to a problem that's supported by research, let's say something like having the lack of after-school programs in underserved communities negatively impacts the youth of that community. There's a gang of research available on that. So whatever sector that you're providing services in, you definitely should be familiar with the existing research, and that should help you and guide your nonprofit when you're designing your programs. So you can always refer back to that. So this is the kind of evidence that funders are looking for. You should be familiar enough with this evidence and data and statistics to include it in your application to show the funders that, one, you know what you're talking about, and two, there's actually a problem that their funding can address. So my overall advice is, before you submit another grant application, read some of the past applications you've submitted and look at them through the eyes of a funder and ask yourself three questions. Does this application fit in that foundation's priorities? Does my opening sentence make them want to read further? And 3, do I have evidence that the program I'm proposing can actually deliver the results that I'm proposing? If you can answer yes to all 3 of these, then you're already separating yourself out from the crowd. So let's recap today's video. Funders, grant readers, stop reading grant applications within 10 to 15 seconds because, number 1, what you're proposing is not in alignment with their funding priorities. Number 2, your opening line is weak or generic. It doesn't pack a punch. It's not memorable. It doesn't make them want to read further. And 3, your solution isn't backed by any evidence. And that could be evidence from success from your program in the past or evidence that's supported by research. So now what are you going to do? Your next step should be go back to your most recent grant application and read the first 3 lines. See if it aligns with the funder's priorities. Does it grab their attention? And does it establish your credibility as a nonprofit? If none of that applies, that's your starting point. That's all I have for you today. But if you found this information helpful, drop a comment below. And you can also click the link below to join the Lotus 9 community, where we send out weekly emails to our community members with different tips and ways to better position yourself to obtain grant funding. And I also provide insights to some of the workshops and people I speak to in the funding world to help give you that extra oomph you may need to submit that next application. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next video. Don't forget, you already have the passion, you already have the vision. All that's left for you to do is to position your nonprofit so funders can see you and want to support your mission as well. See you until next time. Bye.